9. Frozen iguanas. In early 2018, Florida was hit with a bomb cyclone that brought temperatures in some areas to record lows. Anyone who's lived there for a long time wasn't surprised to see frozen iguanas scattered across the ground on their backs. It's happened a few times before, including in 2008. But it would certainly be a shocking sight for any newcomers to the Sunshine State. The iguanas fell from trees when they became frozen and could no longer maintain their grip. And while they seemed dead, many, if not most, initially survived this cold weather-related paralysis. In fact, the reptiles go into this state as a survival mechanism. To conserve energy, their metabolism automatically slows way down to the point of almost stopping, causing them to enter a state of reduced activity called a torpor. Larger iguanas are more likely to survive being frozen, according to Zoo Miami Communications Director Ron McGill, who told the New York Times that he believes the creatures are evolving to tolerate colder temperatures and may soon start creeping their way north. Many of the frozen iguanas perk right up as soon as the weather warms up, and those who survive pass on their hardy genes. Only time will tell if McGill's theory is true. Number 8. Vladimir Kamarov. Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Kamarov accomplished some impressive yet downright depressing firsts during the Cold War space race. In 1964, he commanded Voskhod-1 spaceflight. It was the 7th crewed Soviet spaceflight, and the first to be crewed by more than one person. 3 years later, in 1967, he became the first Soviet cosmonaut to fly into space more than once when he was chosen as the test pilot for the Soyuz 1. And sadly, while Kamarov wasn't the first cosmonaut to die in space, he was the first to die on a space mission. A lot went wrong during the Soyuz 1 test flight. Sensors, antennas, and other equipment malfunctioned, keeping Kamarov trapped in orbit longer than planned. On his way back to Earth, his capsule's parachute failed to open. The capsule crashed to the ground at full speed and exploded, reducing Kamarov's body to a disfigured and charred mass measuring just 12 by 31 inches. His ill-fated plunge to the ground was overheard at U.S. listening posts in Turkey, where National Security Agency personnel listened to the doomed cosmonaut, telling agents on the ground that he was about to die. Despite the failed mission's setbacks, the Soviet space program continued, and Kamarov was remembered as a trailblazer of interstellar travel. Number 7. Gold. To many, it seems like a dream come true for gold to fall out of the sky. But civilians were lucky no one got hurt when it happened in the frigid Siberian city of Yakutsk in 2018. Something went wrong with a Cold War-era cargo plane packed with $378 million worth of gold, platinum, and diamonds during takeoff from the region's airport, causing the treasure to spill out of the aircraft and onto the ground below. Nearly 200 gold ingots weighing a collective of 3.4 tons rained down, with most of it landing on the airport runway. Valuables continued to fall out of the plane over a 10-mile stretch as it flew to another airport to make an emergency landing. Luckily for the mining company that owned the precious cargo, most of the items were retrieved. This may not have been the case if the incident occurred in a more populated region. But as one of the few inhabited parts of the Siberian High Arctic, the areas surrounding Yakutsk isn't exactly teeming with activity. In a statement, the airport reported that the plane's cargo hatch ripped off, while transportation officials suggested that the crew may have secured the cargo improperly before takeoff. Either way, it created a mess, but the outcome could have been worse. Number 6. Loon Fallout. If even a tiny amount of ice forms on the wings of a plane while it's in flight, things can become deadly fast. The ice deforms the wing's shape, thereby decreasing lift, and also it adds weight to the aircraft, which then has to work harder to stay aloft and runs the risk of simply falling out of the sky. Apparently, the same aerodynamic principles apply to certain birds. In early 2023, dozens of loons crash-landed in northern Wisconsin after their wings began to ice while flying at high altitudes. Sometimes loons collide with the ground after mistaking wet pavement for water, according to Marge Gibson, the founder and director of the Raptor Education Group, who spoke with Wisconsin Public Radio in April. But she said this wasn't the case in the recent episode of Loon Fallout, which caused birds to appear in pastures, forests, and other places they wouldn't normally land on purpose. Loons can't walk. Their legs are designed for paddling, so they always aim for water. Unlike most other bird species, they can't perch themselves in a tree to wait out a storm, making them especially vulnerable to bad weather. And just like a plane needs a long enough runway to lift off, the species needs a spacious body of water in order to take flight. Not even a small pond is big enough, and most of the birds who survived the initial fall landed nowhere near water, period, leaving them stranded and in need of rescue. Gibson told WPR that loon fallouts are rare, but they're still problematic for the species' population in Wisconsin, which is declining. At least 25 loons were saved after the most recent fallout, thanks to the quick response of conservationists and bird rescuers. Number 5. A flaming basketball? Dustin Prokita's life was turned upside down without warning one evening in 2022, when a flaming object struck the porch of his Englebright, California home. The blaze spread rapidly, giving him just enough time to rescue one of his 2 dogs and escape before the house was fully engulfed in fire and smoke. His home burned to the ground, forcing Dustin and his wife to start completely over with nothing but the shirts on their backs. As residents gathered to watch firefighters combat the out-of-control flames, several people mentioned seeing a mysterious glowing object falling from the sky right before Dustin's house was hit. Footage captured by a neighbor's doorbell camera showed a flaming projectile crashing straight into the home. Dustin and numerous others began to speculate that the object, which he described as resembling a flaming basketball, was a meteorite. It's extremely rare for meteorites to land anywhere near people, let alone hit their house, but it was the most logical explanation anyone could think of in this case. Authorities were hesitant to fully get on board with the idea, but a fire department spokesperson said he didn't dispute that it was possible. Scientists were also unconvinced. Meteor astronomer Peter Jeniskins told National Public Radio that the blazing streak people saw in the sky was dozens of miles away from Dustin's house, and he further pointed out that most meteorites burn and break up upon entry into the atmosphere. On the rare occasions when a large chunk of meteor makes it to the Earth, they don't start fires because they're typically not hot enough to. The cause of the fire that destroyed Dustin's house remains a mystery. Do you think a meteorite hit Dustin's house? Let us know in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 4. A fish downpour. There's often a rock-solid, logical explanation for instances of animal species that don't belong in the sky raining down on an area en masse. But this isn't the case in the remote northern Australian town of Vladimir, which has seen at least 5 large downpours of fish over the last 3 decades. It most recently happened in early 2023, when residents saw a storm coming and were shocked to see the town blanketed by spangled perch. The freshwater fish were also deposited over Vladimir in 1974, the mid-1980s, 2004, and 2010. In the most recent incident, locals woke up to find the freshwater fish scattered all over the ground. Many were still alive and flopping around. Scientists aren't entirely certain what causes the phenomenon, but they believe strong updrafts lift the fish out of the water and carry them long distances, sometimes hundreds of miles before they fall out of the sky. Queensland Museum ichthyologist Jeff Johnson told ABC Australia that this happens in a lot of places, including elsewhere in Australia. And while it doesn't happen every day, it's not exactly an uncommon event. But he conceded that the fish that fell in Vladimir in early 2023 were surprisingly large, and said that it's rare for fish that heavy to travel in the wind due to their weight. At number 3, mysterious white powder. In 1969, the exhaust vents clogged at a Borden Foods factory in Chester, South Carolina, where the non-dairy creamer Cremora was being manufactured. The blockage caused the powdered mixture to seep into the air outside, which reportedly created enough of a mess on its own. But then, it mixed with moisture and fell as sticky, gooey globs of rain. More than 20 years later, in 1991, the company was fined $4,000 over the incident. It was likely a gross and inconvenient experience for locals, but luckily non-dairy creamer isn't a particularly hazardous substance. Residents in Seveso, Italy were less fortunate in 1976, when a white aerosol cloud escaped from a chemical factory. A chemical reactor had exploded, causing a reaction that spewed dioxin into the air. Dioxin is a known carcinogen and environmental contaminant with a long half-life. It's bad for humans, animals, plants, pretty much anything living that it comes into contact with. People who came into contact with the vapor suffered from nausea, headaches, eye irritation, and other immediate symptoms, as well as long-term effects including liver failure, decreased fertility, cancer, and birth defects. The Seveso accident resulted in the highest known exposure of dioxin to a human population to date and was ranked the 8th worst man-made disaster by Time magazine in 2010. Some of the few good things that came out of it were better scientific understanding of the chemical's effects on the human body and the environment, as well as heightened safety regulations to prevent a similar disaster from ever happening again. Number 2. Space junk. Every now and then, a defunct space satellite falls to the Earth. This is normal and expected, and it may even happen more often than one might assume, considering that there are over 8,200 satellites currently orbiting the planet. In most cases, nobody is hurt by the plummeting space debris. Most of the satellites usually burn up upon entry into the atmosphere, and only a handful of components even make it to the ground. There are even rules in place to prevent space junk from landing on any humans. Under current standards, which are implemented in 2019, the odds of orbital debris killing a person must be lower than 1 in 10,000. Of course, there are older satellites that are still in space and will someday return to Earth, which is not designed or launched with this requirement in mind. Such was the case for NASA's 5,400-pound Earth Radiation Budget Satellite, or ERBS, which was launched in 1984 and made its descent back to Earth in early 2023. Luckily, the odds of debris hitting a person were still very low, and nobody was harmed when the debris landed in a remote part of the Pacific Ocean or Alaska. In fact, experts believe that it was left of ERBS fell in such a far-flung region that humans will never cross paths with it. Satellites aren't the only thing we have to worry about when it comes to space junk descending to Earth, however. For example, unlike other countries, China lets its rocket boosters free fall back to the atmosphere rather than ditching them in a controlled fashion into the ocean or in vast unpopulated areas. But China is apparently going to do what China wants to do, and as things currently stand, other nations have failed to get the country to follow tighter safety measures. Some experts say that there's a 10% chance of a person being hit by falling rocket debris within the next decade, and unfortunately, our only choice is to wait and see if it happens. And at number 1, anchovies. San Francisco residents were flabbergasted when buckets of anchovies rained down on certain parts of the city during the summer of 2022. It happened multiple times over a month-long period and was followed by thousands of dead anchovies washing ashore along the coast outside the city. Local resident Britt Gerhard told the New York Times that she and her husband had just put their daughter to bed when they heard a loud bang on their roof. They initially thought it was an earthquake, but looked outside to see fish flying past their window. The alarming phenomenon wasn't as biblical as it seemed, according to scientists, who told the Times that the strange occurrences simply meant that the anchovy population is thriving. According to marine ecologist Jared Santora, the fish that rained down from the sky most likely fell out of the birds' beaks while they were flying food back to their chicks. In Santora's words, they can only carry so many fish, and some of them fall out. Fish also sometimes get dropped by birds who fight over their catch on top of buildings. Santora describes the practice known as kleptoparasitism as when birds beat up on other birds for its lunch. He further explained that the anchovies that washed ashore were most likely pushed into shallow waters by a predator, then got stuck and ran out of oxygen. Scientists aren't sure why, but anchovy populations reportedly wax and wane. It's normal for their numbers to explode and apparently for the fish to appear in peculiar places during these boom periods. Thanks for watching. Which one of these would shock you the most if you witnessed it? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more videos like these. See you soon!